Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to give people another few minutes to log in. Seems like about half the folks who registered are here so far, which is great, but I'm going to give people just another few minutes and then we'll get started. If in the time while we're waiting, if you wanted to make sure that you put into the little question box, just let me know that you can see everything and hear everything okay. So that way I know that the tech is working, as well as that you guys know where the question box is. So take a second to do that, and then we'll get started in just a few minutes. All right, let's give folks just one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, let's dig in. I apologize, I'm going to step away for just 1 second. In a minute, I'm making some water for tea that's about to boil, but we'll get started in the meantime. So a few housekeeping notes before we dig in. So today we're going to be talking about how to design and manage a quality mentoring program using the elements of effective practice. We're going to dig into what that means. If that's what you were hoping to attend today, then you're in the right place. If not, then might be in the wrong place. But hopefully you're all here for this. We're going to spend the next a little over an hour walking through this. I'm going to make sure I try to leave about 15 minutes at the end for any questions. So we might answer some there, and feel free to hold on to questions at that point. You're also more than welcome to share your questions in the question box as we go. I'm going to try to keep that open while we walk through and address those throughout the webinar. So for those of you who don't know me, I looked at the names of the attendees, and it looks like the bulk of you I have met before, which is always a good start. But my name is Jack Kavanaugh. I'm the Director of Training and Program Development for Mentor New York. Mentor New York is the New York State affiliate of Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. We provide training and consulting services to mentoring programs throughout New York State. I'm based out of our office in Western New York and Buffalo. The bulk of our team is down in New York City, and we serve programs anywhere between. My background is in social work and youth development and youth mentoring. I've worked in youth programming all the way from schools and higher education, as well as community space programs, community centers, summer camps, after school programs over the past 15 years. And so hopefully I can, bring some of the experience and knowledge that I've developed over that time to you today. All right, so just to get started, let me come back to that. Let's start with a quick, oh, why is the poll active? Give me 1 second. Here we go. There we go. So just to see how everyone's feeling today. So we're gonna use this tool a few times today for Poll Everywhere. You can respond one of two ways. One, you can go to the website pollev.com/JackK840. I'm gonna put that link into the chat. Or you can use your phone and just send a text message to the number 22333 saying JackK840 and then pick your sort of option. So A, B, C, or D. Oh, it's supposed to say hump day, not TGIF, because today is Wednesday. I forgot to update it since the last time I used this. But never been better. Hump day. Please, I need it to be the weekend already, and dear God, get me out of this house. How's everyone feeling today? I'll give you guys a second to answer while I go fill up my teacup. Doesn't seem like it's working right now, but that's okay. We'll there we go. All right, so you should be able to answer now. Nice, perfect. So a lot of people want it to be the weekend already. Full disclosure, that is also what I answered. I know as the weather starts to get warmer, it's like, really just could use the weekend and sitting outside. But awesome. No one's at the dear guy, get me out of this house phase yet, so that's good. So let's go on to the next one. I have a few more questions, and we'll use this a few times throughout today. This is, what best describes you? You run or work at a mentoring program, you're a mentor in a mentoring program, you're thinking of starting one, or you're just kind of curious to learn more? All right, so most folks run, work at a program, a few people starting one, a few people just kind of curious. All right, we'll use this a few more times throughout. But we're gonna start with, let me go back a few slides. I don't know why this isn't letting me. Well, we'll start here. So we're gonna go over a few things. The first one is just sort of general program management, really high level. How do you start to build up a program? Then we'll break down some of the basics of program operations using the elements of effective practice. We'll talk a little bit about program evaluation, really basic, and then I'll open the table to the floor for any questions that you may have. So before we start with this, I always like to start with an overview of just what the elements of effective practice for mentoring really are. And so if you go to our national office's website, so it's mentoring.org, and we'll share all of this with you at the end, you'll be able to find the full research-based list of evidence of effective practice for mentoring. it's easy to look at the checklist and think like, these are all the things that I have to do in order to be a good mentoring program. But the reality is that these are just the sort of things that, when we've looked at a lot of the evidence and the research, the programs that have successful outcomes tend to have these things in common. And the more of them that you do, the more likely it is your program will have strong positive outcomes. It's possible to do things that are not on this list, and part of these elements that are going to get you positive outcomes, and there are things that you might do and still end up not finding yourself having as strong outcomes as you'd like. But what we know is that based on the research, again, these are all the pieces that you want to have in place. What I usually tell folks is that if you aren't going to have one of these sort of recommendations or benchmark practices in place, there should at least be a reason why, right? This doesn't work for my community or my population. We just don't have the capacity to, move into this particular benchmark yet, but we're going to at some point. Like, all of those are reasons why you might not. What you don't want to do is have it be because you just don't want to, or there should be some type of reason. And so they're divided up into 6 sections, and we're going to talk through this in the second half, but it's recruitment, screening, training, monitoring and support, recruitment, screening, training, matching and initiating, then monitoring and support, and then closure. And then I think the unofficial sort of 7th element is the evaluation piece that we'll touch on at the end. But before we get into those really granular pieces of how to run a program, let's start a little higher level and talk through what we call our mentoring logic pyramid. So if we start at the top and think about what are the ultimate outcomes that we want to get for young people, we want to have a successful outcomes. This could be academic improvement, it could be social emotional growth, it could be more community engagement, it could be a stronger sense of future. There's any number of outcomes of what that could look like, right? But we want to have those successful outcomes. Now, when we've looked at one of the most consistent pieces of program structure that most influences those successful outcomes is having a long-lasting relationship and having that relationship be meaningful. There are some really great programs that do have short-term mentoring programs. Those tend to be really, really focused on specific, very specific outcomes and have really strong curriculums in place. Whereas the longer lasting might be more focused on the relationship building. So both are okay. We still say long lasting matches because that tends to be what a lot of the research has shown, but some of the newer research is really telling us too that the shorter but more intense relationships can also be really helpful. So if you think about it as like a swimming pool, right? You could have one that's wide and a little bit shallower, or you could have one that's smaller but really deep. But either way, the amount of water is like what's important. I don't know if that's a helpful analogy, but it's one of the ways that I've been thinking about it as we've been reading through some of this newer research. But in order to have either long-lasting or very strong matches, we want to make sure we're having screened, trained, and supervised mentors, right? The better that we do at these 3 pieces, the more likely they are to stay a part of our program for either a long period of time or be really engaged and active and productive mentors. So we want to make sure we're really focusing on these pieces. But in order to have these mentors in place, we need to have people who can actually do that work, people who can screen, train, and supervise the mentors. And so that's where the trained staff come in. We want to make sure that we have staff in place who are equipped to do the screening, training, and supervision. Now, before we can hire staff, we need to have some type of program management plan. We need to have some type of outline of what is our program about? How are we managing these different pieces? What is that staff member going to do? We have to have a plan for them to then execute. Now, before we can build up our program management plan, we need to make sure our mentoring model is one that addresses the population needs of our community, of our young people that we're trying to serve. And different populations have different needs, different communities have different needs. And you're going to know the needs of your community better than I will, or probably most other people. So, we can offer a lot of support in program design and different suggestions, but at the end of the day, you need to make sure that your model is in place that addresses the needs of the specific community and population that you are serving. And before you can do that, you need to have some type of mission statement. Now, when we talk about mission statement, really what we're talking about is having a theory of change in place, a mission and a theory of change. We are taking young people, we're delivering this specific intervention, and this is the anticipated outcome that we expect to see, right? We're taking young women, we're providing them with academic tutoring and relationship support, and we expect to see stronger attendance at school, right? Very clear. And so the way the mission statement and the theory of change work is to help us really articulate what is it that we're trying to do here. What we don't want to do is just say, hey, we're going to take these young people, we're going to take these adults, we're going to smash them together and just hope and pray that good things happen, right? We want to be a bit more specific than that. And so as we're starting to do that, it all starts with that mission statement or that theory of change. So I like to start with this basic definition of mentoring. Mentoring is a structured and trusting relationship that brings young people together with caring individuals who offer guidance, support, and encouragement aimed at developing the competence and character of the mentee. Now, what you won't see here is a particular comment on the age of the mentor, right? Peer mentoring programs. It could be a group or team. It doesn't have to be in person. It doesn't have to be specifically anything, right? It's a structured and trusting relationship where both folks are entering into it saying, this is a mentoring relationship to support young people and developing that competence and character. So while we're thinking about basic program design, we want to talk through a few basic considerations. The first is, what population? I'm going to stop here for a second. Most of what we will be talking is going to be pretty general around what mentoring programs have looked like, when we've been able to do them in person and live and all of that. We do also obviously have a lot of considerations, as many programs are using virtual and e-mentoring. And so I'm not going to dive too deeply into that today, just a few specific recommendations on how some of this might change or not based on what you're doing, if it's virtual or not. Ultimately, most of the recommendations don't change. There's some specific pieces that might be in place. But just to keep that in mind, we'll mostly be talking, as though we're really talking about in-person pre-pandemic mentoring. So the first thing is population. So who is the program going to serve? Who is your young people? Are they specific students at a school that you partner with? Is it a school in a specific neighborhood, age, or set of interests? Who is it that you are trying to reach? The second is thinking about site-based or community-based. Most mentoring programs fall into one of these two categories. The first is site-based. So site-based is what you might think of, let me start with community-based. So community-based is what most folks might think of when they're thinking of mentoring, right? So you have mentors and mentees who are matched. They go out and meet in the community, on their own. They set their own schedule. They decide when they're meeting, what activities they're doing. They just kind of report back and say, hey, we met, we connected, this is how it went. And you keep tabs on them that way. Site-based is, like it sounds, everyone is meeting at the same either site or time or location or something like that. So it could be at a community center, it could be group, or it could be everyone's together in like the gym in a community center playing games and doing their work, but they're all doing it kind of at the same time. So there's a lot more control. A lot of times site-based programs will have maybe a curriculum or a specific set of activities that they're doing and working through. Site-based is also nice because, especially if you're doing group mentoring or anything like that, it just works a lot better than trying to coordinate. So you say, hey, we meet, every other Saturday from 2 to 4 at the local community center, right? Then everyone kind of knows when to show up. It also helps a little bit with, liability, right? And risk management, because everyone's in the same place, everyone's there, you can see everything that's going on. There's a lot more kind of control involved. So a lot of programs who do site-based, they enjoy that part of it. There's no better or worse. They have pros and cons. It just depends on what your sort of capacity is, what type of program you're looking for, and what type of intervention you're trying to provide. Lastly is the program model. So there's a few types of ones that we would do. I'm not going to worry too much about formal and informal mentoring today. Those are some just loose terms, but the idea being, formal mentoring being part of a formal program, whereas informal mentoring or semi-formal or natural mentoring being part of a relationship that is founded through like my teachers at school or my baseball coach, or things like that that sort of just pop up from the sort of natural relationships we have throughout our lives. But a few different models. The first is that traditional, right? That one-to-one. You have a young person, you have a mentor, and you match them together. This could be site-based, it could be community-based, but either way, it's one-to-one. The second one is group mentoring. So you have one adult with up to about 4 young people. That's the ratio we typically encourage, because any more than that, and you're really doing more behavior classroom management than you are really relational mentoring. If you're interested in group mentoring, our webinar that we did earlier this year, as well as one about peer mentoring, those are the 2 we've done so far this year, have really, we'll have a lot more deeper information about how to run those specific types of programs. So I encourage you to check those out. We do have the recordings available on the website. Then we also have team mentoring. So for example, you might have 2 mentors with 8 or 10 young people, right? You can kind of keep that similar ratio in place, where you can kind of increase it. And there's some really interesting dynamics that happen with that. I know like a lot of boys and girls clubs, for example, will use team mentoring. It's really effective for them. Peer mentoring, exactly what it sounds like. You're being mentored by a peer, typically someone who's a little bit older than you. And again, for more details on that, you can see our webinar from earlier this year. And then lastly, again, the virtual mentoring. Any of these models can happen in a virtual platform, right? Traditional group, team, peer. It just changes a bit of the mechanism of how we're meeting with them. And again, site-based and community-based can also both happen virtually, right? A community-based, they're setting up their own times to meet on Zoom or whatever. Whereas site-based might be, hey, everyone's getting on this Zoom call, and I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms with your mentor and mentee or something like that, or small groups or whatever. All of it can very easily be translated to virtual. So this doesn't really change any of this. So it's not exactly a different model so much as it is a different mechanism. I also think, as we're thinking about the population, this is a very crude diagram, but to illustrate a bit of the point. With mentoring, we think about like a bell curve of young people based on, thinking about whatever your outcome is that you're looking for. Let's use this, just say academic success for the sake of an example. On one hand, you're gonna have students that are facing severe challenges, right? They really need tutoring. They need, some sort of academic counseling. They might have learning disabilities. They might have issues at home that are preventing them from really focusing on school because their family's struggling with homelessness or addiction. Those are the students that need serious wraparound, social work supports, not just like a mentoring intervention, right? On the other side, you have those students that are, pretty much academically successful already. They're not really going to benefit from that mentoring relationship as much either. And so in the middle, you have these students that don't really fall into either sort of category. These might be your B students or your C+ students, who really, what they need is just someone to help them build a little bit of structure and accountability to their systems. One of the big things that helps, mentoring has a really big impact on, especially in school-based programs, just talking about academics, is around attendance, right? If you are going to a school and you can say, this is a school that I really feel cared about, there's someone here who's holding me accountable, who's helping me stay on top of my work, I'm going to show up more. And if I show up more, I'm going to be more engaged. I'm going to be able to be a little bit more successful academically. And so again, thinking about that sort of middle range of young people who are not dealing with such severe challenges that what they really need is, professional social work, counseling type of support, but are not so far on the other end that, with or without you, they already have a lot of that social capital in place, that they might not really be the ones who could most benefit from mentoring. Obviously, everyone could benefit from having a mentor, but frequently our ability to serve young people is limited, right? Our capacity is limited. And so having a clear idea of who it is that we're going to serve, who our program is most going to benefit, and who we're going to target is really going to help make those decisions about, we have a waiting list of, 50 kids to get into our program. Which ones am I going to, let in next? So again, really starting with that foundation of your mission statement. It defines the overall purpose of your program and why it exists. So there's three general ideas, right? First is funding. You might be part of a larger organization, a larger nonprofit that has its own mission statement, and that's great. They're going to use that when they're applying for grants, right? If you are applying for grants as your program, you're going to want to put that mission statement on there. It's one of the first things that any application always asks. The second is to generate interest in your program. So these second two, especially if you're part of, and we work with programs like this a lot, who are part of a larger nonprofit, right? So it's a larger sort of community services agency or something like that, and they're a smaller mentoring program. It's still useful to have some type of mission statement because it helps one generate interest in your program, right? Really articulate, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and it makes it that much easier to sell to folks and to really bring people in, whether you're recruiting mentors or mentees and family members to bring them in or anything like that. You're really able to use that to generate interest and you really articulate what you're about. The next one is to really focus and energize those involved, right? If everyone's on the same page about, our mission, why we're here, what our core values are. I worked with a program once that had a very concise mission statement. It was just to provide a safe space for young people who need one. That was it. It was an after-school program. And they painted that on their wall of their building, like on the inside, not on the outside, but on the wall they had a big open space. That was the main part of their center. And they painted that on the wall. And they could look at it and say, this is why we're here, right? We're here to provide a safe and caring space for any young people who need it. And really help them build, especially their staff and volunteers, and make the young people feel like they're cared about. And things like that can be really powerful. I was, to paint it on the wall, but having it. So a few kind of tips for writing it. Again, if you have one in place already, great. If not, this is a good place to start. You want to keep it, clear, concise, realistic. It should reflect your values and beliefs. It should represent those you seek to help. It should be powerful. You should be proud to see it published somewhere. And ultimately, will someone who hears or reads the statement understand what your program is and why it exists, right? So again, thinking back to that theory of change, your mission statement should reflect your theory of change. We take young people, we provide this intervention to achieve this outcome. Population, intervention, outcome. It doesn't have to be quite that simple, but it's a really good way to break down and get started around how do I start to think about what my program's mission is. So a few notes about program management. You need some type of system for managing information for three specific reasons. One, to evaluate your program efficacy. If you're not tracking any sort of numbers, data, outcomes, anything, then you're never going to be able to say my program works, right? We take this population, we provide this intervention, we expect this outcome. If we don't articulate that and or if we aren't collecting data to support that, then we'll never know if any of that is actually happening. And so what happens is, again, maintaining the statistics for grantors or funders, people are giving us money, they want to see if what we're saying we think is going to happen with our program is actually happening. And the last is risk and liability. You want to make sure you're having those records going back because you don't want to open yourself up to any lawsuits or anything like that. You want to make sure you have those pieces of data in place and those records in place. A few ideas of some information you want to make sure is recorded. The first is, program information. So, what is, if you were to, disappear off the face of the earth tomorrow, could someone come in, find your program information and start running it, right? That's how much detail you want to have in there. Someone can pick it up and say, oh, okay, I can get this program running again. So how are you recruiting people? How often are they meeting? All of those different pieces that someone needs to know to run your program. The second is match information. Who's matched with who? How often are they meeting? Do you have records of like the dates that they're meeting? What was discussed? What kind of supervision are you providing? Have you been meeting with them regularly to provide feedback, to troubleshoot issues? Are you touching base with family members and the mentees? All of that stuff should be tracked in some way. And then lastly, your finances, budget, development, fundraising, all of that stuff should be in there as well. Because again, the last thing you want to do is get some type of audit or review and then be like, oh no, you didn't keep good enough records for review. That's the outcome that nobody wants. So make sure you're just keeping good track of any financial documents. What's coming in and where is it going? I'm not going to spend a ton of time on risk management. I do want to make sure we're talking about it a little bit. Ultimately, risk management is just having systems in place to mitigate and help prevent any types of threats or issues come up to. I'm sorry, my dog's going crazy. The UPS truck just pulled up. 1 second. So some type of threat to your ability to accomplish your mission, right? And so risk management is just trying to manage and minimize that threat. So again, you want to think about it in 2 ways. One, what systems do we have in place to prevent those issues from happening? And then the second one is, what systems do we have in place to address an issue after it does? If we have an issue, if we have any type of harm come to a young person as part of our program, what are we going to be doing about it, and what systems do we have in place to prevent it? And we're going to talk more about that in some of the program operations pieces. And then here's a really great resource if you do want to dig into this and make sure you're doing okay, is the Nonprofit Risk Management Center. I've been on a few webinars and things that they've done, and they're a really, really, really great resource. And I point people in their direction all the time. Okay, so let's dig into some of the program operations. So for some reason, the closure is cut off at the bottom, but it should be there. But it's recruitment, screening, training, matching, supervision, and closure. And again, the 7 sort of unofficial elements of effective practice is that evaluation that we'll spend a little bit of time talking about. So let's go back to the poll everywhere. I want you to think about what makes a successful mentor. And you can submit more than one response to this. Some good stuff coming in. I'm going to put a few answers in myself. All right, some good stuff coming in. So listening and consistency, advocate. I'm guessing the non and the judgmental go together, not that people are saying that mentors should be judgmental, but that's good, I agree. Listener, a lot of conversation around listening, consistency, even on the very much in there. This is great. So I think it's important to focus on this as we're starting to think about, program operations. What makes a mentor successful? What is it that we're looking for in the mentors that we have found to be successful? And how do we build up systems to, one, find them, bring them in, and train and supervise them in a way that leads them to have these skills and these abilities? Let's see, I see a question just popped in. Oh yes, non-judgmental goes together. Oh, thank you. Oh, I see someone else asked if we'll get this PowerPoint. Yes, you will get the PowerPoint and all the slides as a resource as well. So let's talk about the first standard, recruitment. This is about recruiting both mentors and mentees. Now, when I think about recruitment, especially for volunteers, we're typically going to have two sort of categories, right? We have warm body recruitment and targeted recruitment. Warm body recruitment is just like what it sounds like, right? We're just trying to get warm bodies in the room. So that's a large number of volunteers in a short period of time, and we're not super worried about their qualifications. This type of recruitment is like tabling at a community library or pushing out, Facebook ads to get people to sign up, right? We're just trying to get a large amount of people in place. The targeted recruitment to have a smaller audience who might be looking for specifically skills, but they might have not commonly found characteristics or things like that. So they might, you might want to look for, mentors that have experience working with young people, or, if you're doing a program that's around, I don't know, playing tennis, then you might want to have people who have experience playing tennis, right? Things like that. The targeted recruitment also could look like, building, I think of it as like partnership-based recruitment, right? So I'm recruiting someone who's then going to go out and recruit me more people. So I'm recruiting the HR person at a company that works as an office near where we do our mentoring. And through that HR person, they're going to find maybe 4 or 5 mentors to come with us, right? So things like that. It can also be really focusing on having your existing mentors go out and do a lot of recruitment. Your existing mentors are going to be your best recruiting tool if you have those in place. No one is going to be able to really speak to the power and impact of being a mentor as much as someone who is out there doing it, right? Who can say, like, this has been my experience in my background. And so all those are really more targeted, right? Your mentor is targeting their social network. You're targeting a specific company or, a local like church or a synagogue or mosque. You're talking to the leadership and saying, hey, can you find people in your community who might be willing, right? So you're recruiting one person who's finding you more. And so being able to really define your audience is really going to help. And part of this recruitment is also about mentee recruitment. Now, some of you might have a specific pool that you're drawing from if you have an existing relationship with a school or a community center or something like that, where the mentees are already in place and you're not worried about that. But for a lot of programs, you're doing some type of mentee recruitment. And so, again, think about for all of these people, what are their interests and hobbies? What type of specific demographics are you looking for? Are there any specific challenges and barriers that your mentees are facing, or that you feel, based on your theory of change, that you feel like you could positively impact? Same with your mentors. Maybe they share having experienced the similar challenges and barriers, and that's one of the things that they can really come to you with. So a few really specific things you can kind of do, right, is define that role, write a mentor job description, really break it down. I was working with a program that was having a really hard time doing recruitment for an after-school mentoring program. And he was going around, doing a lot of the recruitment and would say, hey, do you want to volunteer as part of a mentoring program after school with some middle school kids, say from 2:30 to 4:30 on Thursdays or something like that. And the mentors would be like, oh, I don't know, or the prospective mentors, I should say, would be like, I don't know, what do I have to offer? I'm not really sure. I'm not really much of a mentor, like that kind of thing. But then you started to reframe it and say, hey, we're running this after school program for kids and we're looking for some volunteers to come and, play basketball and just kind of talk to them about, school and life and, just, be someone to kind of hang out with them. And they were all like, yeah, that sounds great. I can do that. And it's like, that's all that mentoring is, but just reframing it and being specific about what does that actually entail? Because mentoring, we thought about it, at the beginning, having that definition in place is important because it's one of those things that a lot of people can have very different definitions of in their head. And so as we're doing our recruiting, the more clear we can make our expectations, the time commitment, what the activities look like, the better. And that's one of the reasons why having existing mentors do the recruitment is so powerful, because they can really articulate that. The second piece is looking for adults who might have some type of vested interest in helping that population of youth. So if they're, school-based program, there'd be school staff who wanted to be part of it. We worked with one program that one of their best mentors they ever had was a guy who owned a local community store, corner store down the street from the school where a mentoring program was at. And after school, the kids would always come and like shoplift candy bars from his store. And so it was one of those things where it wasn't causing him a huge amount of damage, but it was frustrating. So they brought him in to be a mentor for the young people at the school. And then, of course, now they know this guy. They stopped stealing the Snickers bars after school, right? So they built that relationship. And so, who is it in the community that has this interest in helping them? And then lastly, again, some of those institutions or other places that you can look, right? Religious institutions, community centers, business clubs. Again, where are those organizations where you can recruit one person who can then recruit 5 or 10 or however many? So local companies are a good example of that too. And retirees is always a great pool of mentors, folks who all of a sudden find themselves with a larger than usual amount of free time. So let's talk about standard 2. This is screening. We're going to talk specifically about screening volunteer mentors. Some programs use paid staff as mentors, and a lot of this might not be quite as applicable to you because some of the legal regulations and things like that are different. Mostly in that there are no real legal regulations around who can and can't volunteer. And so when someone's applying, you don't have to let them be a volunteer, right? You don't have to let them into your program. And thinking about screening as well is that every interaction is an opportunity to evaluate that volunteer's appropriateness. I think sometimes when we talk to programs about screening, they think of it as that sort of that background check and like an initial interview process. And then once they're in, they're like good to go. But once someone's in, you're still gonna be training them, you're still gonna be providing supervision, you're gonna be checking in with them. And at some point, there might be red flags that are raised later in that process that you say, this person is not a great fit for my program. And that's okay. You can use that as an opportunity to, screen them out at various points later on. Once they're in, it's not like you're stuck with them forever. But we're going to talk a bit about some of that initial screening process now and some of those follow-up red flags that you might see during the monitoring and support section. But 3 really basic things that all programs should have in place is an application. It should have some type of written application where you're, making sure you're getting information about them. You come with some type of short answer questions, like why do you want to do this? Do you have any experience being a mentor? It just shouldn't be 10 pages, but it should be, fairly in-depth. The second one is an interview. You want to have some type of interview in place. That's really, and I think all of us know this, but really the best way to get to know anybody is to spend time sitting across from them one-on-one, getting to know them, seeing how they deal with certain situations. There's lots of really useful questions you can kind of throw at them. We can have some suggestions around questions that we've asked in the past and have supported programs on. But you want to make sure you're having that interview. The last one is a background check. You want to make sure you're doing some type of background check. The sort of gold standard that we recommend as a baseline benchmark is the fingerprint-based FBI background check that runs a national check. Sometimes folks will be able to do a state run or a social security number based check, and those are fine. You want to do the most that you can, and so having something in place. With any of this, you just want to make sure that it's consistent, right? You want to have some type of actual screening procedure, and you don't want to make sure, and you're not, once you have that procedure in place, you don't want to be making exceptions for anybody. Even if you have a board member or someone who donates a lot of money coming to volunteer, they still need to be going through this process. Because if you make that exception and then some type of harm comes to a young person from that person and you didn't adequately screen them, that's where you open yourself up to some liability. So you want to make sure you have a process in place. Release a written application, an interview, and a background check at minimum. And I'll say one of the reasons why we really encourage the FBI national fingerprint-based check. is that one of the things we know most about people who are really on the lookout to harm young people is that they'll move state to state pretty frequently. And so it just helps add one layer of protection against that. And then as well as references, that's sort of the next tier of things. Like those are the big three. Having some type of references after that is also really helpful. And it could be, you know, a written letter, it could be just a phone call. Hearing about them through someone else's sort of eyes and words can be really helpful. There's a number of other tools that we can use to help make some of these decisions. The first is a home visit. Most programs don't do this unless it's a community-based program where you have policies that allow your young person to go to the mentor's home. A lot of programs don't allow that anyway, so you don't always have to. A DMV check, this is helpful. Again, if your program has a policy in place where their mentors are going to be allowed to drive mentees places, then you definitely want to make sure you're running some type of DMV check. But you also want to make sure, you know, it could be, even if they're not, it can be a useful tool, right? If someone has, I don't know, 10 speeding tickets in the last 3 years, that might be a red flag about someone's ability to follow the rules and listen to, you know, if you get a speeding ticket once or twice, like that happens, you know, we're all human. You get 10 speeding tickets in 3 years, that's a bit more of a red flag. You can also check the sex offender registry. That's really easy to check, especially if you're, you know, running background checks, but you can also, you know, just do that pretty easily. It used to be that every state had their own separate registry, but now they're all together, so it's pretty easy to search. Oh, I think the last one was supposed to be, I don't know, the last bullet point, all these slides it's cut off, but the last one was a, you know, partner or spouse interview. Again, especially if it's community-based and they're visiting the home, you want to make sure you're interviewing or talking to everyone who's in that home, not just the mentor. And effective screening reduces risk, right? That's what this is all about. Thinking about those policies, those procedures in place. What systems are you having in place, again, to prevent those sort of preventable issues or harms young people from happening? And so I think there's sort of one way to think about it the way I do it. I think in a lot of these like visual sort of metaphors. So if it's helpful for you, then great. If not, then, you know, I'm sorry. But I find it helpful to think about. But thinking about screening as like a series of sort of mesh nets that are filtering out smaller and smaller pieces, right? So that, you know, background check is your wide net, right? You're filtering out the big fish, like people have a history of harming children, right? That's the big problems that you're getting right out of the way. Then you're interviewing someone and you're kind of assessing their ability to, you know, communicate effectively, have effective boundaries. Like, are they here because they want to be the savior to some young person? And you're like, I don't know, that's a red flag for me. We're not here to be saviors. We're here to be mentors. You know, you're starting to filter out with, you know, smaller and smaller holes to get those smaller and smaller pieces of, you know, red flags out of the way. It's also important thinking about the background checks to remember that you want to have some policy in place around how to respond to the background check results, right? Just because someone has something come up as a result of a criminal background check doesn't mean that they cannot be a good mentor. It might be in some ways a sign they could be a really great mentor if they had some issues that, you know, led them to have some sort of run-in with the law 20 years ago that they've turned around, and they can help and talk to young people about that experience. That can be really powerful. And so if someone has like a nonviolent drug offense from 1986, you know, that's not necessarily something you should be like, oh, nope, can't be part of it, right? Because that's going to really limit a lot of people who, you know, due to war on drugs and different things like that, might have a lot of criminal records on might have a criminal record in place. Specifically, you know, a lot of men of color who came of age during those times. There's a high percentage of folks with some sort of drug charge. And again, that doesn't mean they wouldn't be a good mentor. And in many ways, those are the exact types of mentors we want to be putting in place. So you want to look for, obviously, any type of history of violent or exploitive behavior. You know, maybe if it's a consistent pattern that doesn't seem like they've been able to turn around, and then you can ask them about it and say, you know, what was this about? I used to run a program for a volunteer program at a community center that supported not young people, but adults and young people in recovery from substance use addiction. And a lot of times the referrals we would get for our volunteer program was from the judges overseeing the drug court, right? They would be the ones saying, like, you could really benefit from being part of and giving back to your community, because I see that you are someone who is trying to turn their life around. And so a lot of times those are the people that make the best mentors. So I say all that to say that it's important to think about the background check as just another tool. It's not a checkbox, right? They have a criminal background, so they're automatically out. You want to have some type of policy and review process. And you also want to make sure you're screening for suitability, right? There's that screening for safety, and that's really important. That's that risk management piece. But you also want to make sure you're screening for suitability. Is this someone who's going to be a good fit for my program? How will they deal with adversity? How do they manage conflict? How will they manage their time? All of these different things that you want to make sure, based on your mentees and your program model, that they have the ability in place to manage. Most of the harm that comes to young people, in my experience as part of a mentoring program, is not because a predator snuck through your background check process and wants to gain access to young people. Most of it is well-meaning adults with poor boundaries and limited training and guidance. They take them in their car when they're not supposed to, and they get in an accident. Or, they start giving these young people access to money, or letting them stay at their house, or whatever it is. It's just those boundaries end up being a big part of it. And so as much as you can start to stave that off from the beginning, the better off you're going to be. And so I think it's important to think of screening as being about all of these different pieces that come together that you take into account to make your final decision. So all those different tools come into play, right? Your external documents, so the application, the interview, written materials, your impressions, your intuition and observations that from doing this for a little while, consulting with other staff to make sure that you don't have some type of blinders on. Ultimately, all come together to serve your final decision. So that's screening. Now let's talk through training. When you think about training, especially if you're training mentors and mentees, you should have some type of training or orientation at least in place for both, as well as families and guardians. You want to make sure that you're explaining the program guidelines, right? What is the program like? What should they expect? How are things going to be running? All of that. You want to make sure that you're giving them as clear of a set of expectations as possible. Then you want to go over the matching process. Once you have mentors and mentees matched together, when are they first going to meet? How are they going to spend time together? How are you deciding who gets matched with who? All of that. When you're talking about mentoring, I always think of mentor training it being two categories. One is the sort of administrative, right? How often are we meeting? What type of paperwork is there going to be in place? If I have any issues, who do I call? Like that type of thing. And then you have your sort of skill-based and programmatic stuff, right? Just how to be a great mentor. Listening skills, addressing trauma, family engagement, all these other pieces that come into play of being that great mentor, right? Thinking back to the beginning, when we talked about what makes a successful mentor, we need to make sure we're giving them the skills to be able to do that. So these are just a few sort of topics for some of those that have come up in the past, right? Stages of development, engaging young people, diversity, dealing with, cultural differences, making sure that there are specific challenges that young people deal with. So, drug and alcohol, sexual, what's the word? So sexual health, family engagement, all these things are going to come up, and you want to make sure mentors are equipped to, if a mentee raises any of these issues, they should know how to respond. And sometimes the training is like, if they bring up issues of sexual health, like that's not us, we don't do that, but here's where you can, kind of direct them, right? Or if they bring up issues of alcohol use, you can say, that's not something we really talk about or address here, but I want to connect you with someone else you can talk to about those issues, right? A lot of times, again, you want to make sure that mentors know those boundaries, because what we don't want them to do is to get into that relationship and not know where those boundaries are and start crossing them because we never articulated like, hey, don't go over here, don't go over here. One of the biggest pieces of feedback we get from mentors about mentor trainings is that, ultimately at some point they have to be sitting here, there's a mentee sitting there, and they have to have a conversation with them. And starting that conversation and building that relationship in a very granular and tactile way is something that most mentors feel like they don't get from trainings, right? Just basic active listening skills, asking open-ended questions, things like that. And so making sure we're definitely hitting those. So again, a few other kind of topics, make sure that get addressed: policies, procedures, who to call if there's an issue, what kind of paperwork are we dealing with, what kind of communication protocols, what is that matching and meeting going to look like? Like, we want to make sure they're walking into that feeling prepared. And then again, some of these programmatic pieces, right? Engagement skills, stages of development, cultural competence, trauma, family engagement. Having a mentee orientation is really helpful. We want to make sure that they are full and equal part of the mentoring relationship. And so what is expected of them, making sure that they're prepared. We want to make sure the mentee feels like an active participant and not a passive recipient, right? Mentoring is not something that happens to a young person. It is a relationship of which they are a co-equal member. And so we should treat them accordingly in the way that we do our trainings and orientations. All right, so matching and initiating. We want to make sure that mentoring relationships do not end early, right? This is one of the most important things that we can really do as a program coordinator. Trying to do everything we can to make sure the mentoring relationship lasts its full term of however long our program was designed for, whether that's a school year, a calendar year, or something along those lines. And one of the most important places to start with while we're doing that is right when they're first meeting. We want to make sure we're setting them up for success by matching them with the right person. There's a lot of things you can kind of take into account. I'm going to get all of them out here while we're looking for what characteristics and attributes to match mentors and mentees based on. The most important thing is just their personality and what sort of characteristics and traits they bring to the table, right? I think the matching is almost more of an art than a science. And so the more that you do it, the easier it becomes to start to get a sense of, I think this person and this person would be better together, or, you just kind of start to get a feel for it. Do they have any interests and hobbies in common? Do they have some type of shared personal experiences they could bond over? All of these are really important pieces to having that really positive and helpful relationship. I think sometimes programs can get really caught up in really focusing on things like race or gender, or oh, hey, this mentee said they really want to be a lawyer. This person's a lawyer, let's match them there. Those things tend to be less important unless your program is specifically focused around those things, right? If you're running a mentoring program that's specifically for young men of color to explore their sort of cultural and racial identity, then yeah, sure, you want to have mentors in place that reflect that. Or we work with programs that work with young women to introduce them to professional women in the community to build positive relationships there. And again, you want to have that type of stuff in place as well. But unless it's really part of that program structure, then it tends to be less important than some of these other pieces. So there's different ways that you can do, choosing matches. The first and most common is that the staff choose, right? You match people together. Some programs have in place something around mentor choosing their matches or their mentees. I will say in my experience, I've yet to see that really work particularly well, but some programs do have that in place. Typically when that's some type of, the only time I've really seen it work even somewhat well is when it's like college students or professional-based type mentoring. Mentee chooses, this can actually be really powerful, and even with parent and guardian and mentor, even if they're not specifically choosing, I do think it's always good to incorporate what a parent or guardian, a family member or mentee articulates as what they're looking for in a mentor. They're gonna know what they want, and so taking those sort of recommendations seriously is always a good thing. One model that some programs have started to use is called youth initiated mentoring. I haven't worked with a ton of programs that do this, but I'm familiar with it. But in this sort of model, instead of matching and recruiting mentors and bringing them in and matching them with mentees, you're coaching and training the mentees, young people, to go out in the community and find their own mentors and sort of bring them into the relationship and make, part of the program. But it's more skill-based for the mentees to learn how to navigate and build their own mentoring relationships. Some things like mutual or activity or group-based mentoring, matching. So, again, I've seen this to work more with sort of older folks or, professional-based programs. So they might do like a speed mentoring. So everyone meets with each other for a little bit and they put down like, hey, this is who I like to match with. And then you use that as like a tool for matching. The only time where that kind of isn't great is if you have mentees who are writing down, they all want to be with the same mentor, and then you kind of have to do some damage control there. But typically if it's, they're older and more mature, you can kind of handle that a little bit better. But it can not feel great, especially for young folks. The other part of matching is the initiating, right? So starting with that structured, supported first meeting or contact facilitated by staff is really important. You want to make sure that you're having some type of icebreaker, some type of activity. Again, remember the big feedback is mentor, mentee, what do we talk about? So giving them something to break the ice, thaw the awkwardness, so to speak, can be really helpful. You want to make sure that policies and expectations are really clear and laid out very early on, especially with them together. What a lot of programs will do that I found to be really successful is combine that sort of initial training and orientation with that initiation. So say you block off 4 hours on a Saturday, you spend the first like 2 hours with mentors in one room, mentees in another room, getting their training, orientation, and then they come together for some type of sort of joint orientation where they're all signing some type of agreement of like, here are the expectations, all of that. You have family members doing that as well. And then spending the last bit, hour and a half, doing some type of facilitated activity together, like a scavenger hunt or, I don't know, silly games, things like that. And it also helps to use that as an opportunity to lay out those next steps. Right, this is how often you're going to meet, or this is what the program looks like from here, while everyone's together in the same room getting on the same page. So let's talk about monitoring and support. This is, I think, in my opinion, the most important part of all of these, because one, it's where you're going to run into being able to prevent the most issues. If you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening with your mentors and your mentees, you're going to be able to really intervene and head off any major issues before they really, blow up into something major. The second reason I think this is so important is that I've seen it be the first thing that gets cut when program staff are limited by capacity. So if you're only one person running it and you don't have the time or energy to do all of these, those follow-up calls, that monitoring and support is the first thing that gets scaled back. And so we want to make sure we're really focusing on it. And so you want to make sure there's some type of clear process for checking in, seeking feedback, handling problems. You want to be communicating regularly with all program participants, mentors, mentees, family members. Helping matches find ways to reach goals, addressing concerns, bringing mentors together for peer support is really helpful, providing ongoing training activities. So if mentors are all raising issues of like, hey, I'm struggling with, I don't know, some specific issue like family engagement, then you can do a follow-up training that where all of them come together and talk about that. It's also useful because to do that sort of follow-up training, because if you have a new mentor at the beginning, all of the trainings and examples and whatever you're walking them through are abstract, right? They're not real to them yet. They haven't done it yet. And so you can deliver the same training to them at the beginning, and then when they're like 6 months in, and they're going to get so much more out of it at that 6-month point, because that now they'll be able to really, understand a lot of the different things that we're talking about. And so having those types of follow-ups where you're digging a little bit deeper into, maybe that initial training is just around, active listening and boundaries, And then as you get in, you can dig a little bit deeper around, trauma or family engagement or, stages of development, things like that. You want to make sure you're documenting all contacts or attempts at contact to provide this type of support. Again, if you're seeing red flags here, like they're not responding to your calls, they're not meeting with their mentee often enough, these are things you're going to find out during this phase, and then you can kind of gently guide them out of the program. You also use the opportunity to recognize mentors and mentees, right? You can have a monthly, mentor of the month or mentee of the month or both, or something like that. It can be a really good time to use that as an opportunity to do that. We recommend making sure you're checking in with mentors, mentees, and families all at least once a month. And typically, we recommend doing 2 check-ins the first month of the match as well. A few other things to add, making sure those one-to-ones are scheduled as well as with those group meetings. Sometimes it can be useful to alternate. So say like 1 month you do one-on-one check-ins with all the mentors, and the next month it's a group check-in. You kind of alternate. Things like that have been really helpful. And again, making sure you're updating and checking in with the mentee and the mentee's guardian, parent, family member, some type of responsible adult. And then lastly, all of this is a great opportunity to spot those red flags. What red flags are coming up? What types of things are popping up for the mentors? What are you seeing? What issues do you want to see, get addressed? That type of thing. So the last official standard is closure. A lot of matches end prematurely. This doesn't mean it's always something sort of tragic where you have to sort of fire a mentor. Sometimes a family moves away, or the mentor gets a new job where they just can't do it anymore, or it's not always because you have to fire the mentor, so to speak. But a lot of matches end prematurely, a third to half of them. And so how they end really does matter, right? We want to make sure that if that premature ending does happen, that we're providing the support to make that ending as sort of untraumatic as possible. A lot of young people who are part of mentoring programs might have histories of not so healthy relationships with the adults in their lives who might have left or not got a chance to say goodbye. And so the mentoring relationship is a really good opportunity to help model what healthy relationship look like, including healthy relationship closure. Relationship closure isn't always a bad thing. I have friends in my life that I was friends with, when I was in college or graduate school, that I don't really talk to as much anymore. And not because we had a falling out, but people come and go, and we have people who are with us in certain seasons of our life, and that's just part of the human experience, and that's okay. But if you're a young person who's had those relationships ending be traumatic experiences, you're not going to see that as something that's okay and normal and healthy. And so the mentoring relationship is a great opportunity for us to get in there and provide some of that support and some of that feedback. And most of us are pretty bad at saying goodbye. Like, people are not good at it. I think as humans, generally speaking, we find goodbyes to be like pretty awkward. And so as the sort of program staff and coordinator, we want to make sure we're giving the mentors the tools, language, and skills they need to say goodbye well. So if we think about closure, we can think about it in 2 sort of axes, right? Both in terms of timing, so early, well-timed, and overdue, and functional and dysfunctional. So if you think about an early ending, right, there's a functional sort of process that you have a system in place, the mentee is supported through it. We're either rematching them quickly, or we're providing some type of support and guidance. And we're still gonna have some type of sadness or pensiveness, some type of it's not going to be a joyful experience, but it can be functional and supportive. When we get into that dysfunctional phase, that's when something's unexpected and unstructured, right? So that's when you see abandonment, fear, anger, those types of emotions really come to the surface. Even at the well-timed, if you have a well-timed ending that's dysfunctional, so say you have a school year-based program, and everyone knows the program is going to run out at the end of June, and then the end of June comes and ends, but the mentor and mentee never really talked about it. It was just kind of like a thing that hung over them until, June came along. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, all right, well, this was fun, but see you next time. There's that sort of awkward sense of anticipation that's stressful, and then a sort of confusion around what is the relationship, what just happened, and we don't want to have that either. And so what we want to shoot for is that well-timed functional ending, right? We're coaching the mentors either a month, 2 months in advance around, this is what you're going to get out. This is some ways to talk about this. We're telling the mentees like, hey, this is, the mentoring relationship is going to end at this point. And sometimes the relationship ends if you have a part of your program that runs on a school year or calendar year. And it can be good to think about the closure as more of a renegotiation of the relationship, right? It doesn't have to be like a goodbye. It can be, hey, mentor and mentee are getting together to think about what is our relationship going to look like going forward. Do we want to renew our mentoring relationship and stay part of the same program and continue on for another year? Do we want to, do we kind of run our course and we can say, hey, this has been great, but I think it might be better to move on, but here's my email address, you can reach out if you have, if you need things later, whatever that looks like for your program. You can coach the mentors on that process as well. And then the last part of having a really functional closure, I think, is having some type of celebration at the end, right? You went through this experience together, this is great. And having some type of it can be like a celebration, a graduation, a culmination, whatever you want to call it, depending on the structure of your program. Some programs continue on for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, so you're not necessarily going to have a clear closure point, but you could have some type of annual sort of, party or celebration that really helps set a rhythm to it. And if your program does run on a set schedule where it's a school year or a calendar year, and then that's sort of it, then you definitely want to make sure you're having some type of event in place. So you want, when you're thinking about that structure, right, you want to have that policies and procedures in place. So you want to have a process in place when there's a anticipated closure, right? That process to say goodbye, like we were just talking about. You're providing some support, talking points, questions for mentors leading up to them, saying goodbye, as well as to an event. And then in the event of an unanticipated closure, you want to have a process in place to support that transition. Are you going to be, rematching them with someone, who's going to get into that room and talk to that young person about, why the mentor is not going to be around anymore. If the mentor is moving and they can give you a month or 2 leeway, then you can really help, mitigate it that way. It all sort of depends, but you want to have those policies and procedures and structures in place to support both anticipated and unanticipated closures. So we're going to talk very briefly now about this sort of unofficial 7th piece, and which is evaluation. Most programs at the very base will do some type of pre or post survey, right? Some pre-test and post-test. I think the biggest part of evaluation is, again, taking that step back and thinking about what is it that our program does, right? How are we taking that theory of change and turning that into a narrative around what a young person experiences as a part of our program and how they grow? And then what sort of data do we need to be measuring to tell if that is happening and if it's not? And it all starts with identifying what are our program's expected outcomes. It could be academics, it could be social skills, family relationships, sense of future, exposure to new places, experiences, all of those different pieces. You also want to make sure, you're having some type of follow-up. So if your program runs on a 9-month, you're doing a sort of maybe like a pre, mid-year, and post-evaluation can be really helpful. And then if you have access to them after that, doing a follow-up down the road can be really great too. One of the things we know about mentoring is that sometimes the impact doesn't show up for 1, 2, 3 years down the road. And so we don't necessarily know the impact that the mentoring relationship has in that moment. And so if you have access to long-term data, so if they're part of a school system you have a relationship with or things like that, then all the better. You also want to make sure you're incorporating not just mentee self-reports, but also mentor evaluation or even family members, teachers, counselors, whoever else you might have access to, their evaluation of the mentee's growth along your sort of articulated benchmarks. The other piece that's not on here that is also really important for evaluations is to have some type of program satisfaction surveys in there too. You want to make sure you're creating space for mentors, mentees, program participants, family members, whoever, to give you feedback on their experience of being part of your program, right? Suggestions for improvements, things like that. And so you want to make sure you're tracking those outcomes as well as sort of program satisfaction. So just to recap, you want to think about your design considerations. Who am I serving? What type of program do I want to be running? What's the ideal model for me? You want to have some type of management plan that includes risk management. You want to make sure you're thinking about how to recruit, screen, and train mentors, as well as making those matches. That match support and relationship coaching is absolutely crucial. And then that closure and that evaluation. So I'm going to pause here and open it up for questions. I'll give folks a minute to put that in there. While you're putting in any questions, and I'll check those in a second, we do ask that you do a brief survey. So here is the QR code. So if you take your phone and open up your camera and point it at here, it'll open up a SurveyMonkey link as well. That'll take you to a quick survey just around how we did, any comments, suggestions. You'll also get this via email afterwards with the slides and a link to the recording, as well as a link to the survey. But I find it easier when I'm attending things like this to just do it really quick now, and I find the QR code thing to work pretty well. So I'll leave this on for a second. You can ask any questions. And then I'm going to share one more piece of information. I'm going to change the slide to another one, and then I'll come back to this in case you still need it. But we are also having our New York Mentoring Network. So if you're a program that wants to really engage the other mentoring programs around New York State, reaching out to us. There's a link at the bottom where you can see here, it says mentornewyork.org/join the network, or just go to our website or reach out to myself and we can get you plugged in. It's a really great way to get resources and connections with other programs around the state, build some relationships, do some advocacy, you get access to some extra services through us. It's totally free for you guys, but we just want to make sure we're bringing together people as much as possible. The last thing I'll mention is that on April 16th is our Mentoring Matters Conference. This will be a full-day virtual conference on Friday, April 16th. Right now, we're still in our early bird registration phase, at least until Friday, for $25 each. Registration is on our website. If you go to mentornewyork.org, you'll be able to see all of the registration information. We're going to have some really great resources, some really great presenters, especially focusing this year's conference on issues of racial justice and racial equity in mentoring. And so if those are things that you're interested in or want to explore more for your program, that's going to be a really great place to do it. So I'm going to pause my talking for a little bit and open up the question box. So here's a great question. If your program is short, maybe doing, so I'm guessing you mean short in terms of time, like it's only running for a few months, then you might want to do your check-ins a little bit more frequently, for sure. The monthly is like kind of the minimum. If your program's running for a shorter period of time, you might want to do a little bit more, definitely. You just want to make sure your mentors are getting the check-in and coaching contacts that they need from you in order to be most successful. I'll get another minute for questions. If you don't have any questions and you're all set, then you can log off. I'm going to probably close up in a second. You will get all this via email. It should be by the end of the week. If you do have any other specific questions, you can feel more than free to reach out to me. Here is my email address. If you don't have it, like I said, I think most of you I recognize. You might have it anyway, but if not, there it is. Feel free to reach out. Our job is to be a resource. We're here to support you and support your programs. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your week. I hope to see most of you at our conference on the 16th. And thanks for joining us.